I have seen a lot in my 43 years on the bench. I have watched people lie to my face, cry crocodile tears, and try every trick in the book to escape justice. But I have never in all my decades wearing this robe had someone point a loaded weapon at me in my own courtroom until the morning of February 8th, 2026, at exactly 9:47 a.m., when Police Chief Richard Vandermeer walked into my Los Angeles courtroom and made the biggest mistake of his entire life. You think you've heard wild courtroom stories before? Trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change the way you think about power, authority, and what happens when someone believes they're completely untouchable. This story went so viral that it made international news in 73 countries. Let me take you back to how this whole thing started. It was a regular Tuesday morning, and my clerk handed me a file that seemed simple enough on the surface. Case number 2026, TR 8847, a traffic violation. The defendant was Richard Vandermeer, age 52, police chief of Beverly Hills, a wealthy suburb in Los Angeles County. The complainant was Officer Maria Santos, a 34-year-old LAPD officer and single mother of two young girls ages 6 and 8. Now, Officer Santos was not just any cop. She had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer before joining the Los Angeles Police Department 7 years ago. She worked night shifts, the dangerous ones, the ones nobody else wanted, so she could be home during the day with her daughters. Her oldest girl, Emma, had been diagnosed with leukemia 2 years earlier. Maria was drowning in medical bills, working overtime whenever she could get it, and she never complained, not once. Her fellow officers told me she was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it more than she did. On January 22nd, 2026, at approximately 11:34 p.m., Officer Santos was working her regular patrol on Interstate 405 when she clocked a black Cadillac Escalade going 97 miles per hour in a 65 zone. She activated her lights and initiated a traffic stop near the Sunset Boulevard exit. The Escalade didn't pull over right away. It kept driving for another 1.5 miles before finally stopping on the shoulder. When Maria approached the vehicle, she immediately recognized the driver, Police Chief Richard Vandermeer. He was wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Maria made in 2 months. His wrist had a Patek Philippe watch worth at least $80,000. The Escalade he was driving had custom trim and modifications that pushed its value well over $95,000. Maria was respectful, professional. She said good evening and asked for his license and registration, and this is where things started to go wrong. Vandermeer looked at her badge, looked at her face, and said something I cannot even fully repeat here. He told her she was a nobody cop from a nobody department and that she had no business pulling over someone of his position. He told her to get back in her little car and pretend this never happened. Maria stayed calm. She explained that she clocked him at 97 miles per hour and that she needed to see his documentation. Vandermeer laughed, actually laughed in her face. Then he said something that made my blood boil when I read it in the report. He told Maria that her daughter's medical bills must be pretty expensive, and it would be a real shame if she lost her job and her health insurance over making a big deal out of nothing. Let me say that again. This man, this police chief, threatened a single mother's sick child to avoid a speeding ticket. Maria's hands were shaking, but she wrote the ticket anyway. She cited him for excessive speed, failure to yield to emergency vehicle, and reckless driving. Vandermeer snatched the ticket from her hand, tore it in half right in front of her, threw the pieces out his window onto the highway, and drove away. Maria collected the torn pieces, documented everything in her report, and filed it with her supervisor the next morning. 2 days later, Maria's captain called her into his office. Someone from Beverly Hills had called, someone with connections. There was pressure, subtle but real, to make the ticket disappear. But Maria's captain, Captain Robert Chen, was old school. He'd been on the force for 28 years, and he didn't bend for anyone. He told Maria to pursue it through the courts. He said he would back her 100%. So that's how Chief Richard Vandermeer ended up in my courtroom on that October morning. When he walked through those doors at 9:45 a.m., 2 minutes before his scheduled appearance, I could see the arrogance radiating off him like heat waves from summer pavement. He wore another expensive suit. This one looked like Brioni, probably $6,000 minimum. His shoes were Berluti, maybe $2,000 more. His lawyer walked beside him, some fancy private attorney from Beverly Hills named Gregory Ashford, who specialized in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. Officer Santos sat in the gallery wearing her dress uniform. Her medals were pinned to her chest: Combat Action Badge, Army Achievement Medal, her LAPD commendations. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, back straight, eyes forward, professional, dignified. I could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that comes from working double shifts and spending nights in hospital rooms watching your child fight for her life. I called the case. Case number 2026, TR 8847, State versus Richard Vandermeer. The attorney stood up and Vandermeer stood up beside him, but not in the way defendants usually stand in my courtroom. He stood like he was doing me a favor by being there, like this was all beneath him. I asked Officer Santos to present her testimony. She stood, walked to the witness area, and described everything exactly as it happened. She was clear, detailed, and credible. She provided the radar gun calibration records, the dash cam footage, everything documented perfectly. When she described Vandermeer's threat about her daughter, her voice cracked just slightly, just for a second, but she composed herself and continued. Now, I've been doing this long enough to know when someone is telling the truth. And Maria Santos was telling the absolute truth, every word of it. Then it was Vandermeer's turn to speak. His attorney tried to do the talking, but Vandermeer waved him off. He actually waved his own lawyer off like he was swatting a fly. And then he addressed me directly, and what came out of his mouth was something I will never forget. He said the radar gun must have been wrong. He said he was only going slightly above the speed limit, and that Officer Santos must have misread the equipment because she was probably distracted thinking about her personal problems. He said this with a smirk, an actual smirk on his face, while a mother sat there thinking about her daughter's cancer treatments. But here's where it gets interesting. Are you still watching? Drop a comment right now and tell me what you would do if you were in my position. Would you stay calm? Would you throw the book at him? Let me know, because what happened next will test everything you think you know about keeping your cool under pressure. I looked at Vandermeer and I asked him a simple question. I asked if he threatened Officer Santos regarding her employment and her daughter's health insurance. He didn't even hesitate. He said that he may have mentioned that making false accusations against a police chief could have professional consequences for her career. He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, like threatening a woman's sick child was just normal business. His attorney's face went pale. Even this expensive Beverly Hills lawyer knew his client had just confessed to witness intimidation in open court. But Vandermeer didn't care. He kept going. He said that Officer Santos should be more careful about who she pulls over. He said that some people in law enforcement have more important things to do than deal with petty traffic stops. I felt my jaw tighten. I've been a judge for over 4 decades. My father was a judge before me. I learned from him that everyone, and I mean everyone, is equal in the eyes of the law. It doesn't matter if you're a janitor or a police chief. It doesn't matter if you drive a beat-up Honda or a custom Escalade. In my courtroom, you follow the same rules as everyone else, but I stayed calm. I asked to see the dash cam footage that Officer Santos had submitted. We played it on the courtroom screen, and let me tell you, that footage was even worse than the written report described. You could hear everything. Vandermeer's tone, his threats, the way he laughed when he tore up that ticket. You could see Maria's hands shaking as she tried to remain professional while this man mocked her and threatened her child. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Even Vandermeer's fancy attorney looked uncomfortable. But Vandermeer himself just sat there looking bored, checking his phone under the table like this was all a waste of his valuable time. I asked him if he had anything else to say. He stood up again, and this time his tone changed, got more aggressive. He said that he's been in law enforcement for 27 years. He said he's the chief of police in a department that serves one of the wealthiest communities in California. He said he knows the governor personally, plays golf with 2 state senators, has dinner with the mayor of Los Angeles twice a year. Then he looked directly at me and said something that crossed a line I didn't even know could be crossed. He said that I was a traffic court judge who spent my days dealing with small-time nonsense and that I should be realistic about who I was dealing with. He said, "People at his level don't answer to people at my level." Those were his exact words. People at his level don't answer to people at my level. The courtroom went dead silent. I saw Officer Santos close her eyes like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I saw the court officers, my bailiffs, who I've worked with for years, tense up. Everyone knew something was about to happen, but nobody knew what. I took a breath. I looked at this man, this police chief, who thought he was untouchable, and I started to speak. I told him that in my courtroom, there are no levels. I told him that the badge he wears is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to mean service, protection, integrity, not threats against single mothers, not using your position to intimidate people who are just trying to do their jobs. And then, as if the universe decided to write the most dramatic script possible, something happened that nobody in that courtroom expected. My clerk received an urgent message and handed me a note. I read it, and I had to read it twice to make sure I understood correctly. The FBI had been investigating Chief Vandermeer for the past 8 months. Case number FBI 2026, CR 3342. They were looking into allegations of corruption, evidence tampering, and abuse of power, multiple complaints from officers in his own department. Federal investigators had been building a case, collecting evidence, and they were planning to arrest him within the next 2 weeks. But here's the kicker. When my clerk received that message, it came with an urgent addendum. FBI agents were on their way to my courtroom right now. They'd been monitoring the situation, and based on Vandermeer's statements today, combined with his threatening behavior toward Officer Santos, they had decided to move up their timeline. They were executing the arrest warrant immediately. I have to admit, in 43 years on the bench, I had never been in this situation before. I had a federal arrest warrant being executed in my courtroom in real time. But I'm not one to waste an opportunity for a teaching moment. If you're still with me, you're about to see something that millions of people have watched online. This is the moment that went viral. But before we get there, do me a favor and like this video if you believe that nobody, absolutely nobody, is above the law, no matter what badge they wear or how much money they have. Hit that like button and let's show everyone watching that real justice matters. I looked at Vandermeer and I said that before I issued my ruling on the traffic violations, there was some additional information that had come to my attention. He looked annoyed, like I was wasting more of his precious time. His lawyer looked nervous, like he sensed something was wrong, but didn't know what. I explained that the court had received information regarding pending federal charges. I said that FBI agents were en route and would be arriving momentarily. Vandermeer's face changed. The arrogance drained away, replaced by confusion, then fear, then anger. He stood up fast, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He started yelling, actually yelling, in my courtroom. He said this was a setup, a witch hunt, that I had no authority to hold him for federal agents. His lawyer grabbed his arm, trying to get him to sit down and be quiet, but Vandermeer shoved him away. He started walking toward the exit, saying he was leaving and that if anyone tried to stop him, he would have their badges. My bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, a former Marine who had served with distinction for 15 years, stepped in front of the door. He's a big man, 6'4", and he blocked the exit with his body. He told Vandermeer calmly that he needed to remain in the courtroom, and that's when Richard Vandermeer made the decision that destroyed his entire life. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his service weapon, a Glock 19, and pointed it directly at me sitting on the bench. A loaded gun pointed at a judge in a courtroom full of people. Everything slowed down. I could hear someone in the gallery scream. I saw Officer Santos jump to her feet. I saw my bailiffs react instantly, drawing their own weapons. Officer Thompson had his gun out and aimed at Vandermeer in less than 2 seconds. But I didn't move. I sat there on that bench looking down the barrel of that gun, and I stayed absolutely still. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I looked Vandermeer right in the eyes, and I said one word, "Don't," for about 5 seconds, maybe less, maybe more. Time didn't exist. Vandermeer stood there with his gun pointed at me, his hand shaking, his face red with rage and panic. The bailiffs had him surrounded, their weapons drawn, everyone shouting commands. "Drop the weapon, put the gun down now, get on the ground." And then, like someone had cut his strings, Vandermeer's arm dropped. The gun fell from his hand and clattered onto the floor. Officer Thompson moved faster than I've ever seen anyone move. He had Vandermeer face down on the ground with his hands cuffed behind his back in less than 10 seconds. I counted from the moment that gun hit the floor to the moment those cuffs clicked shut. It took exactly 9 seconds, 45 seconds. That's how long it took from the moment Richard Vandermeer pulled that gun until he was under arrest. 45 seconds that felt like 45 hours. 45 seconds that ended a career, destroyed a reputation, and proved once and for all that nobody is above the law. The courtroom erupted in chaos. People were crying, shouting, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Officer Santos had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My clerk was on the phone with emergency services. The bailiffs had Vandermeer pinned to the ground while they waited for backup. And me? I just sat there on that bench, my hands flat on the desk in front of me, trying to keep my breathing steady. I've been threatened before. I've had defendants yell at me, curse at me, promise to come find me, but I'd never had a gun pointed at my face, never felt that particular flavor of terror mixed with rage, mixed with determination to not show fear. Within 3 minutes, FBI agents burst through the courtroom doors. Special Agent Patricia Moreno, the lead investigator on Vandermeer's case, took one look at the scene and immediately took control. Vandermeer was read his rights for the federal charges he was already facing. And then Officer Thompson added the new charges: assault with a deadly weapon on a judge, brandishing a firearm in a courthouse, attempted intimidation of a judicial officer. The list kept growing. You know what's crazy? Are you still watching this? If you've made it this far, you're part of something bigger than just a YouTube video. You're part of a community that believes in accountability, in justice, in the idea that actions have consequences, no matter who you are. Subscribe to this channel and join thousands of others who believe that the truth matters. Ring that notification bell because stories like this need to be told. As they hauled Vandermeer to his feet, he looked at me one last time. The arrogance was gone, the smugness was gone. All that was left was a broken man who finally realized that he'd destroyed everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all gone in 45 seconds. Special Agent Moreno approached the bench and apologized for the disruption. She explained that they'd been investigating Vandermeer for months. Turns out he'd been running a protection racket in Beverly Hills. Local business owners had been paying him money to ensure police presence in their establishments. He'd been tampering with evidence in DUI cases for wealthy residents who donated to his police foundation. He'd been intimidating officers in his own department who questioned his methods. Officer Santos wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one brave enough to stand up to him publicly. There were 6 other officers who had filed confidential complaints with the FBI. 2 had been demoted after crossing Vandermeer. 1 had been fired on false charges. Another had been threatened so badly that he transferred to a department 3 states away just to escape. The FBI had been building their case carefully, methodically, waiting for the right moment to move. They'd been monitoring Vandermeer's communications, tracking his financial records, interviewing witnesses. They had everything they needed. They were just waiting to make sure the case was airtight. But when they heard about his court appearance today, they'd stationed agents nearby just in case something happened. They'd listened to the audio feed from the courtroom. They'd heard him confess to intimidating Officer Santos. They'd heard him threaten me, disrespect the court, and show absolutely no remorse for anything he'd done. And then, of course, he'd pulled a gun on a judge in front of multiple witnesses and cameras. That was just the cherry on top of a very large, very illegal cake. After the FBI took Vandermeer away, I called a 15-minute recess. I needed to collect myself. I went into my chambers, sat down at my desk, and just breathed. My hands were shaking now after the fact. The adrenaline was wearing off, and reality was setting in. Someone had pointed a gun at me in my own courtroom, the place where I'm supposed to represent safety and justice and order. My clerk brought me water. Officer Thompson checked in to make sure I was okay. Officer Santos stood outside my door, and when I invited her in, she broke down crying. She apologized, said this was all her fault, that if she just let the ticket go, none of this would have happened. I stopped her right there. I told her that none of this was her fault, not one single bit of it. She did her job. She did it correctly, professionally, and bravely. She stood up to a bully who was used to people backing down. She refused to compromise her integrity even when threatened. She was exactly the kind of police officer that every community needs. What happened next might surprise you. Actually, it's probably the most important part of this whole story. But before I tell you, I need you to do something. Share this video, send it to someone who needs to hear this story, post it on your social media. Let people know that justice is still possible, that courage still matters, that standing up to bullies is worth it even when it's scary. Share this video right now. After I composed myself, I returned to the courtroom. There were news cameras outside by then. Word had spread fast about what happened, but I had unfinished business to take care of. I called Officer Santos back to the stand. I told her that I was entering a finding of guilty on all charges against Richard Vandermeer regarding the traffic violations, excessive speed, failure to yield, reckless driving, and I was adding a charge of destroying a traffic citation, which I'd seen him do on the dash cam footage. But more than that, I wanted to say something for the record. I wanted everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone who would ever hear about this case to understand something fundamental about justice. I said that Officer Maria Santos represented everything good about law enforcement. She served her country in combat. She served her community with distinction. She worked impossible hours to support her family while her daughter fought cancer. And when faced with corruption and intimidation from someone with more power and more money, she didn't blink. She did the right thing, even though it could have cost her everything. I said that Richard Vandermeer represented everything wrong with the abuse of power. He used his position not to serve, but to intimidate. He used his badge not to protect, but to threaten. He believed that his title made him special, that his connections made him untouchable, that his wealth put him above the rules that govern everyone else. And I said that what happened in this courtroom today proved something that I've believed my entire life. There are no special people in the eyes of justice. There are no untouchables. There is no amount of money, no political connection, no position of authority that places anyone above the law. The federal charges against Vandermeer were extensive: corruption, racketeering, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, abuse of power, and now assault on a judicial officer with a deadly weapon. When all was said and done, he was facing 37 separate federal charges, plus the state charges I just found him guilty of. His trial took place 6 months later. I followed it closely. The evidence was overwhelming. Former officers from his department testified. Business owners described the protection money they'd paid. Financial experts showed the money trail. And of course, there was the courtroom video of him pulling a gun on a judge. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Morrison, the federal judge who handled his case, sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison. 18 years. He would be 70 years old before he was eligible for parole. His pension was revoked. His law enforcement certification was permanently stripped. He lost everything. And Officer Maria Santos, she received a commendation for bravery from the Los Angeles Police Department. The FBI gave her a civilian citation for her cooperation in their investigation. She was promoted to sergeant 6 months later, and the police union, along with several community organizations, raised over $200,000 to help with her daughter Emma's medical bills. Emma's doing better now. By the way, last I heard, she's been in remission for 8 months. She's back in school, playing soccer, being a regular kid, and her mom gets to come home after her shifts knowing that she did the right thing, that she stood up when it mattered, that she didn't let a bully win. I think about that day a lot. I think about those 45 seconds when everything hung in the balance. I think about what could have gone wrong. That gun could have gone off. People could have been hurt. The situation could have escalated into something tragic. But I also think about what went right. A good officer did her job despite threats. A court system backed her up. Federal investigators did their work patiently and thoroughly. And when a man with power tried to use violence to escape accountability, the system responded exactly as it should have. Here's what I've learned in my 43 years on the bench. Justice isn't automatic. It doesn't just happen because we have laws and courts and judges. Justice happens because people choose to make it happen. People like Officer Santos, who refused to be intimidated. People like the officers who testified against their own chief. People like the FBI agents who spent months building an airtight case. People like my bailiffs who risk their lives to protect others. Justice is a choice. Every single day, in every situation, we choose whether to stand up for what's right or to look the other way because it's easier or safer or more convenient. We choose whether to hold people accountable or to make excuses for them because of their position or their wealth or their connections. And here's the thing that I want everyone watching this to understand. You might not be a judge or a police officer or an FBI agent. You might never find yourself in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but you will face moments in your life where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. You will encounter bullies who think they're untouchable. You will see injustice and have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. In those moments, remember Officer Maria Santos. Remember that she was tired, scared, financially struggling, and facing threats against her sick child. And she did the right thing anyway. She didn't back down. She didn't compromise. She stood firm. That's the lesson here. Not the dramatic arrest, or the viral video, or the satisfying ending where the bad guy goes to prison. The lesson is that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to accept that some people are above the rules. My father used to tell me something when I was young. He'd say that the courtroom is the last place where everyone is truly equal. In the rest of the world, money and power and connections can buy you advantages. But in a courtroom, when you stand before justice, none of that matters. It's just you, the law, and the truth. I've spent my career trying to live up to that ideal, trying to make sure that everyone who walks through my courtroom doors, whether they're rich or poor, powerful or powerless, gets treated with the same fairness and dignity. It's not always easy. There's pressure from all sides, subtle and not so subtle, to make exceptions for certain people. But cases like this remind me why I can't do that, why I won't do that. Because the moment we start believing that some people deserve special treatment, the moment we accept that wealth or position places someone above accountability, we lose everything that makes justice meaningful. Richard Vandermeer thought he was special. He thought his badge was a shield instead of a responsibility. He thought his connections would protect him. He thought he could threaten and intimidate his way out of consequences. And for a while, it probably worked. People probably did back down. Tickets probably did disappear. Complaints probably did get buried until he met someone who wouldn't back down, someone who believed in her duty more than she feared his threats, someone who trusted that the system, for all its flaws, would eventually work the way it's supposed to. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If you believe in real justice, if you believe that courage and integrity still matter, then I want you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this. Second, leave a comment telling me about a time when you saw someone stand up for what's right despite the cost. And third, watch the next video that's about to pop up on your screen, because I've got another story about justice that will restore your faith in humanity. It's about a homeless veteran who was disrespected in my courtroom, and what I did about it will shock you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these stories, and thank you for believing that we can build a world where justice isn't just a word, but a reality for everyone.